we know what old people do.
Right, right. So hey, wait, that's where my jewelry is headed.
So welcome to our new episode of our podcast, Aragone Advisors. And today we have Noelle Minto from NM Law visiting us to talk about all things trust, probate, business, and conservatorships. So Noelle, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Noelle, tell us a little bit, share with us your journey into becoming the successful attorney that you are. What prompted you to become an attorney? And also you founded your law firm back in 2006. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I became a lawyer, I guess, about 22 years ago, and I always knew I wanted to be in the space of estate planning and business planning. And the reason I wanted to focus on those two areas is, one, they go hand in hand. But the other reason is I wanted to deal with rational people making intelligent decisions. And so, really my clients are business owners, my clients, manage their estates for the most part. And so it allowed me to really work with intelligent people making long-term planning easy, and, they appreciated it. So that's sort of how I intentionally went into that space of law. And yes, I did found my firm back in 2006. Its current iteration has been around since about 2015. Oh. And, really it just kind of grew organically. So the great news is about what we do in this space in transactions is we're there for our clients as things come up, right? So it's a lifelong relationship, and it sort of spreads throughout the family or other people involved in the business. So it's a great space because you're really able to know your clients and work with them on and off throughout the years. So,
good, and yeah. I love your kind of mission statement, where trust and business law intersect. I think that says it all, because, for the most part, people are used to planning for their families, right? Estate planning. But here you have estate planning all intertwined with business owners that, they have wealth, they've done really well, and now they have to plan their business succession. So you can handle both of them.
Right, it's the right hand and the left hand, and there are a couple other practitioners that really straddle those two spaces. And what happens if you don't, you sort of do your clients an injustice in the sense of, we've got to coordinate how the business works, the cash flow of the business, the long-term, just success of the business, but tie it into your personal estate and make sure that the right, if it's going to be a succession by inheritance by a child, the right child is trained up in the business if they're the one inheriting, and conversations are had on the personal side, so that the family knows how things are supposed to work when mom or dad can't, operate anymore at the business. So yeah, I think it's impossible to have those conversations in a vacuum when you're talking about a closely held business.
I agree. And, not only that, I think that a lot of people don't know what they have in hand, right? They've been working for decades. They've become very successful, but they are doing the operations, the management, the day-to-day routine. And then all of a sudden they go to their trust attorney to plan for their family, and they don't have any clue how much their business have grown.
Right.
Tax implications of inheritance. You probably see that all of a sudden they had a company that was worth $4 million and now it's no longer worth $4 million. And you have to put that in the estate planning side as well.
Right. Well, I think the biggest issue that comes up with a successful family business is just that, right? You're going to have one of two tax problems, and possibly both. One is you're going to exit through some sort of liquidity event, right? So you're going to sell, let's say, to a third party or have some kind of a merger, in which case you've got typically a massive capital gain, right? Which is unexpected because they've been working in the business.
CRT.
Yeah, they've invested $1, right? And 20 years of sweat. And so, you've got this capital gains issue, and you've also got an estate taxation issue. So with 13.6 million of an exemption, they may have other assets that are included. If they're not married, they can't double that exemption amount. And we're very conscientious right now about the timing of exits, because we know that exemption is going to expire at the end of next year, which is what, 18 months now. So we
don't know where it is going.
Right. I mean, right now under the current law, we're assuming about 6 million, but we can do a lot of strategic transfer of assets, right, including the business assets, to get some of that wealth out. Before the exemption goes away. So all sorts of things we can do, but it's a conversation that needs to be had sooner rather than later.
We have currently a trust property that, the business took all of the exemptions and more, and now the assets that we're selling, obviously the IRS wants their portion.
Right. And there's no payment plans.
No.
Right?
You have to pay it all in full.
Right. And I always tell my clients, especially if they have real estate in particular, right? If let's say they own a Class A, high rise. Right. We can't chip off a piece of that building to pay the IRS. So what are you going to do, right? And same thing goes for many businesses that are like a manufacturing business. It's you got to have the plan, but you have to know years in advance.
So that leads me to the next question, because again, most people don't plan until the last minute. So I would love to know, when is the perfect time to plan? So if you're thinking, okay, I worked all these years, I have this company, I want to retire in 5 years.
Right.
Is 5 years an average number to start planning? Is it too late?
I think it depends on the size of the estate and the size of the business and the transferability of the business.
Okay.
Because some are typically easier to sell to a third party, right? Some business types, like I said, manufacturing comes to mind. A lot of manufacturing type entities really are quite sellable. And so in those cases, you may only need 5 years. Right. Ideally, I like to sort of have 2 points of entry. One would be when you're in your wealth generating years, right? So perhaps in your 40s, you know what your business is, you're working on it, you're growing it, you're investing in other things. That's a perfect time. You know your family, more or less, whether you have children or not. So that's a great time, because we don't have to do a lot of early planning, but we can do some that alleviates the problem later. And then the other point of entry, believe it or not, is when I'm working with the next generation down, and I find out, okay, you've got these assets, but you're also set to inherit X. Let's coordinate with mom and dad's estate planner, or let's be mom and dad's estate planner, because I can set up things to skip a whole generation. So, if that's not an opportunity that's been exploited, you're missing out. I mean, quite literally on millions and millions of savings. Yeah. So the sooner the better. And I think it's less painful as well, because they sort of see it as a checkup.
and I said, our job as advisors is always to preserve family harmony, minimize conflict if possible. And with planning, you can accomplish that.
Right.
When it's at the last minute and everybody's trying to get something done because somebody is sick now or something happened, you have more opportunity for chaos and conflict. So what are the strategies you present to your clients to do the wealth preservation, to do a smooth transition from one generation to another one, not only on ownership, but on management?
Right. Well, I would say if we didn't have our, I agree, amazing tagline of where trust and business law intersect, it would probably be purveyors of family harmony. Yes. Because that's really what I view as my job. Yeah, numbers are numbers, and we're obviously trying to maximize those and make everything clear and make sure the tax codes are up to date. However, my entire approach to this is, again, early and often. And setting up expectations the right way. And sometimes, parents in a vacuum have these decisions or these ideas of what role everyone in their family is going to play. And what role everybody in the business is going to play. Okay, he's a key player, he's going to stay, we're going to offer him equity, and then, they're banking on these things coming to actuality, and they don't. So I think, really encouraging my clients and even on their behalf sometimes having these conversations of, this is what we're discussing, what's your position? Yeah. And oftentimes the parents or whoever it is that's doing the planning has to come back to the drawing board and say, okay, I didn't know that was not viable.
I didn't expect.
And you have to leave room for that.
Correct.
And then God forbid people change their mind, right? Particularly, 20s and 30s, they might.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there was this generation where they expected their kids to follow on their footsteps, and now then this new generation is like, no, I don't enjoy that, I don't want to do that. So I'm starting to see a lot more of business owners selling, cashing out, rather than passing the legacy to their the business to their family.
Right. I mean, that was the American dream, right? If you could get beyond just the simple, hey, let's buy a house and have a pension fund, right, of the 1950s, and you were one of the really lucky families that started a cottage business and grew it along the years, that was the paradigm. Correct. Then this is an honor for my children to be able to continue on the legacy. And so it's a complete generational miscommunication and just a misalignment of expectations. And so again, I mean, that's why we consider ourselves counselors, because this is not just like a technical transaction. It's very much a living, breathing thing with a lot of emotions and people on the, considerations.
100%. And for those families exiting, those successful people exiting, that's their baby. They put everything into building that company, right?
Right.
And so their decisions hard to make. Do I sell it? Do I transfer it? What are the implications? How do we do these?
And the employees. I've got clients who, in fact, a particular client comes to mind. There are two owners. They're both about 80 years old, and they have plenty of money, and they wanted to hang it up long ago. The only reason that they have kept that company is because they don't want to displace their 20 and 30 year long employees. And they are working full time in their 80s for the employees.
I don't blame them. I think it's a very nice thing to do, because those employees became family to them.
They did, yeah.
And so, so litigation, when it comes to litigation in business, what arises, what causes that litigation, and normally, tell us about one case that you had to litigate, how long it took you, and what things could have been done to avoid that litigation.
So, typically, we don't do the actual business litigation at our firm. What we'll do is a lot of times litigate, and our firm does trust litigation. Yes. And a lot of times the trust is the owner of the shares. And, there may be sort of a problem with the fiduciary duties of the trustee being, violated or not adhered to. So sometimes we do have issues with business management vis-a-vis the fiduciary. And, if you're dealing with trust administration that goes awry with the business, it all falls under the purview of the trustee responsibility. And so a lot of times we'll find that it's a breach of trust, which is they're squandering assets, they're not really paying attention to the corporate, what's the board structure, are they meeting, are they having shareholder meetings, are they using it as a personal piggy bank of the trust, over distributing and not reinvesting in the company. I mean, there's a plethora of issues. So, we oftentimes do even coordinate with business litigation firms where we're dealing with the trust litigation, but there might be be almost mirroring, you know,
on the business.
yeah, for the corporate breaches. So
and they take forever.
They do.
Those.
Well, trust litigation is I'd say even slower than business litigation because we're in probate court,
Exactly.
which is underfunded and
Yes.
understaffed, and
We know that.
God forbid you have a continuance because it's going to be a 3 to 4 month continuance.
Yeah. You know, I keep telling everybody, remember, you know, they're dealing with anything and everything before people that are in trust or probate because, you know, dead people to the line, right?
Right.
So
exactly. They say, well, everybody in probate court and, you know, conservatorships and whatnot are the exception, but everybody in probate court for the most part is in line for money.
Yes.
And the court deems that to be the absolute lowest, right? And it's not just money like a breach of contract in the sense where, hey, I've been wronged, I need this money back. It's literally, I'm in line for extra money, right? So money that I didn't earn. So the court continues to allocate resources elsewhere. So I guess the moral of that story is do everything and anything to make sure you don't end up in probate court.
I agree, and that's why we keep trying to educate people. You know, two things, you know, statistics, right? I always say when I see the amount of people that are wealthy and they don't have an estate plan in place, they don't have a trust. And for me, it's like, that's the first, you have a bank account, you have a house, you need a trust. You have a family, you need a trust. And sometimes, you know, we're selling a property and she's a successor trustee and she doesn't understand everything because the husband dealt with everything, right? And we see that. And I'm like, who's your trust attorney? And she's like, oh, I don't know. She retired. And so I always say, you need your advisors, you need your trust attorneys, you need people telling you. And then when it comes to business, I see that statistics says 35% of the organizations have a business succession plan in place, the rest don't.
Right.
So planning is everything.
Well, and I think in business succession, you know, buy-sell agreements, et cetera, I can't tell you the number that I see that were drafted and circulated and never signed.
Really?
Yes, because the business owners have to all assent to these terms if it's being done after the fact. Oh. And so what I love is, you know, for example, we have a client that is acquiring some new businesses, and he's going to be bringing in like a early kind of a sweat equity partner, for lack of a better term. And we set off and said, you want the shares, you enter into this buy-sell agreement right at the beginning. And so what, you know, once people have their shares, then it's negotiable, they don't have to sign it. So again, it's all timing, and it goes back to having those conversations early.
Having those conversations, having an expert, you know, giving you advice, because people think they know it all. Today, people Google everything. They think they know everything. And I'm like, no, call the experts, right? That's why we do what we do.
Right.
Our job is to, you know, I try to keep it simple, but our job is to guide you so you are going to have less problems and more success and get to that finish line faster, with more money in your pocket at the end of the day.
Well, penny wise, pound foolish.
Yes.
Right. And so transactional attorneys, by contrast to litigation attorneys and the cost of a litigation matter, are just a fraction. And so it's like you either invest a little bit of money in structuring things properly in the beginning, getting some good advice so you sort of know how to set up the tone, and go out in the world accordingly, right, with that advice in hand. The alternative is I didn't do it correctly, and I end up now having to backpedal, and I end up paying a litigation attorney, which, you know, like I said, I don't think you can take a case to trial in the state of California for anything less than $100,000, and even that I would be impressed with.
Yeah.
I mean, just from what we see.
I agree. Now, what are you seeing on the trust side and probates right now? Are you seeing that clients are starting to come back to, we need to review our trust, or we have to put a trust in place, or are you still seeing a lot of probates?
You know, it's shocking, but we do see a decent number of probates. And we see, I'm going to say about 70 to 75% of them are people who just did not have a plan. Well, let me amend that a little bit. Probably about 60% of our probates are people who didn't have any plan. Then there's another, I'd say 20 to 25% who had a will.
Yes.
And so my thought is, you intentionally went to probate. Why would you do that? That's really stopping short, right? I'm going to do estate planning, but I'm going to do the kind that saves me $500,
yes.
And now I'm spending. I always joke that our children are going to college on the money from probates, not from estate planning,
yes.
because it's tenfold the money that a proper estate plan is.
I agree.
And it's 2 years. So, and then the rest of it is like ancillary probate. So people will do great with their estate plan, have their trust, and then they'll not fund it, right? Or they'll fund it with 70% of their assets, but not the other 30%. In fact, a law school mate of mine, whom I just had a call with this morning, where she goes, "Oh, no, that's not in the trust." And I'm like,
why?
Let's talk about that. Why did you pay me to set up this beautiful plan? And then she took the house out for some other reason. Yeah, they had some other complication, other things going on. But I just said, so here's what's going to happen if you don't get it back into the trust, or into a new trust, perhaps, right? So it's just, clients do that all the time, and then they don't realize the cost of making that mistake.
It's interesting because when I sit clients down for a consultation and we're buying real estate, and I tell them, need to set up your trust, they don't understand it, right? And so I have to explain it to them in another type of, so right. I look at them and I said, well, imagine your trust is this trash bag. And everything you put, including your house and your things, go inside of this bag. So when you die, somebody gets that bag full of assets, rather than having all these assets that need to go into probate. And then they get it. So I tell them, if you ever
it's a great visual.
Yes,
it makes sense.
For them, it sticks. So I said, if you ever refinance, you're pulling the house out of the trust, I need you to make sure you put it back in the trust. And so they get it.
Right.
But you have to make it like that, because I always say, people don't know what they don't know.
Well, people are busy, right? They're busy doing what they do, and it's all not a problem until it's a problem.
Yes.
So that's the bottom line. Is I don't think they realize the extent of the problem. They're not even conscious of the issue. So yeah, it's
but the planning, if they can plan, and that to me has been the reason I do this podcast, is because I want people to understand there's better options. Planning is the better option. I have cases where I walk into a property and they tell me, we can't find the jewelry of my mom because my mom had dementia and she had all this jewelry.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that's lack of planning. If we knew mom had dementia, we should have got to a plan on that, right? Because all of a sudden they forget where they put it, or we had coin collection,
or someone takes it, and then there's no recourse. And I can't tell you how often family heirlooms, jewelry in particular, go missing towards the end of someone's life or right after they die. So it's again, what we've been doing, because we're always trying to keep the door open and the dialogue going with our clients, is, a lot of the clients, especially if they're on in years or they've got a high level of complication, we're now saying, okay, we have like a very, very small monthly flat fee retainer, and say the door is always open, come with any and all issues.
Great.
So you can just call and ask the question, because they don't want that hourly bill.
I get it.
And I get it. I've paid legal bills before, and it's not fun. It's not how you want to spend your money.
That's a great
Yeah.
idea.
I'm hoping, the reason is to take the stress off them, so they know they can have somebody to call, and it takes the stress off them in the sense that they also know, I'm not going to get a bill, right? So we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. We were talking about jewelry. We had a case that we got on a property in Anaheim Hills, and she had dementia, and they had to take her out from the house. She was hoarding, but the family went through everything, and they took supposedly all the possessions, and then we're getting the house cleared, and I had my group of people there, and all of a sudden we pull a luggage, and it's really heavy. We open it, and it's all her jewelry and things, and they're all in pantyhose inside of a piece of luggage. And I immediately called the attorney, and I said, Ross, I just found Josie's jewelry in a luggage, and I'm on my way to your office. He says, Paula, if this wasn't you, we would have never found it.
Right.
And I said, well, it's hers. But,
right,
you know,
but it's sad.
things.
People see an opportunity,
Yes,
right?
And that's why you need people you know and you trust, because they will look after your things. But again, dementia, the things that it can do to a person, right? She probably intended to leave that to her daughters, and now somebody else could have taken it away.
Right. Or it gets thrown away, or any other.
It goes to the dump.
I'm glad you found that.
Right?
That'd be upsetting.
We do, and I'm always checking, and I always tell people, look in here, look in there, books, they leave money in books. You know, we know what old people do.
Right. So, hey, wait, that's where my jewelry is hidden.
Yes, I was walking a house the other day, and I saw a hole on the stairs, on the wall, and I said, was there a leak or something? And she says, no, there was a painting on top of it. I said, well, I bet you there's something in there. There's either money or jewelry or something. You might want to look inside the walls, or a coin collection. And she's like, oh, I didn't think about that. I said, yeah. You know, I already know.
Every house I've ever purchased and then done any work, I always was excited to tear that wall back. Like I was going to find that secret. Not so far.
Not so far.
Not so far.
One day. So tell me, Noelle, what is the best piece of advice you could give a business owner that has worked really, really hard, has accomplished a lot, and is thinking about retirement in the next 5-10 years? Orange County, we have a lot of wealthy families, and thank God we've been doing so good. Everything in Orange County is over $1 million of real estate asset. So what is the best piece of advice you would give to business owners as well as family owners that don't have things in place?
Well, so for business owners, I'd say, you know, to have at least an internal discussion. And the most important thing for them, if they're looking at an exit that is not a family exit, they need to consult with, if they don't have a very well-versed CFO, they need to have a consultant get in there and start organizing or reorganizing their books well in advance of marketing it for sale. They need to figure out whether they should be using a broker or an investment, you know, in order to figure out like the size. So if it's 3 to 4 million, you're probably going to use a broker. If it's north of that, you know, you might be looking at investment bankers. So, you know, having that team identified, and then of course CPAs and estate planning attorney should be involved, as well as your business attorney.
Correct.
Maybe the same person, it may not be the same person. So having everybody understand what parts need to be done in advance of marketing that business, and then what happens once it's marketed and you're under some sort of, you know, LOI or eventually a purchase and sale agreement. So I'd say just form your team, know what the issues are, and start working. I mean, we have one company that they're going to take a whole year to organize their financials, because they're not going to sell for what they need to sell for if they don't. Figure out what your multiplier is, right? And be realistic, I would add. And you may need to get an appraisal, you know, and I know people...
business valuation, you know, takes a lot of time, a lot of knowledge.
And it's cost a lot of money, and they don't like to do it necessarily. But it might be really important for them to have an understanding of what the multiplier is, what the value is, and so on. And then the financing aspect, you know, having the discussion of whether they want to hold back a note, you know, or what the financing looks like.
Or
so that would be...
they want to sell the business and keep the real estate,
Right.
There's options.
If that's an option, sometimes that works great. Or you at least stagger the sale, right?
Yes.
And because a lot of times, depending on the size of the business, the new owner really wants to have that real estate too.
Yes.
But maybe we can stagger it for tax reasons, right? Or just get another couple years of cash flow until you feel comfortable the deal is going to close and you're not having to step back into the business.
Now, Noelle, if somebody wants to do a consultation with you, how do they find you? Where do they find you? Are you available to take new clients?
So you can find me almost 24/7 at my office or via email. No, so I can give you, I should know my website. I don't, but.
Which is a very nice website.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. I believe it's NM Lawyers or NM Law. Yeah. And yes, we do take new clients. Really, it depends. It's sort of cyclical. It depends on the size of the client. Right now, clients of a certain size on the corporate side, we can't onboard any at this very moment because we just stepped into a huge role with a company and they're taking a ton of our time. But for estate planning, we are glad to review documents that they may have in place. We don't charge for that. We can even do it via Teams just to check in. And then, we do handle estates of all sizes. We have 4 attorneys that are just doing estate and estate tax work. And then about 3.5 attorneys that do the corporate work.
Yes.
Yeah. And then everybody else at our firm is unfortunately court facing, which I am not.
I know, right? Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
I know, we always say we want to educate. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the better decisions you can make, right? So it was a pleasure having you, and thank you for showing up today to give us all this advice.
Thanks for having me. Good. Yes, and anybody with questions is always free to call us at any time.
Perfect.
And let us know that they're coming from you. We'll make sure to get them in.
We're always glad to send them your way. Thank you again for watching today, and until our next episode, Paula Aragone, Aragone Advisors, signing off.